Ohayou gozaimasu, minasan. Good day, one and all. Welcome to today's Naruse a Day review, and today I am considering one of the great director's most atypical works, a film that in more than one way is quite unusual in Naruse's career. It is a film as much, if not more, about men than women. It's certainly a film with a male protagonist. And it is a Jidai-geki. It's a period film. In some ways, an action film, though Naruse's treatment of action in this film is typically oblique and quite esoteric. It's fairly unusual for Naruse to make, or it was fairly unusual for Naruse to make a Jidai-geki, a samurai film, a chambara, a swordplay film. I think the reasons for this, as I will elucidate, have to do with the time period in which the film was made, and the type of constraints therefore being placed on directors and on studios during this particular social and political context. So the film is a tale of archers at Sanjusangendo. It's a film that concerns a young man, an archer, who, through winning an archery competition that he is trying to work towards, hopes to restore the good name of his family, which he believes his father has compromised, has besmirched to a certain extent. In this, he's helped by a mysterious samurai figure whose involvement in the dynamics of the plot is something that drives what becomes ultimately a kind of mystery. And his relations with the women around him, his mother in particular, also begin to drive the more personal aspects of the narrative. His search for redemption, his need to restore or reclaim lost honor, all of which is fairly typical for the Jidai-geki. It comes back to questions of Bushido that animated the samurai film, the way of the warrior, the code of the warrior. And this code is something that Naruse treats not critically. He doesn't really engage in this film with Bushido in any detailed way. Unsurprisingly, his interests lay elsewhere. So this is in some ways quite a fractious film, pulling perhaps in more than one direction, but it's a film that is worth our consideration, worth jumping into. So let us do precisely that. Now, what can we say about this film? As I noted, it is atypical, largely in Naruse's body of work. It's a very short film. It clocks in at just over an hour and 15 minutes. And apparently Naruse was himself something less than completely devoted to and enthralled by the script and subject. I mentioned that the film is only nominally about archers. I think it uses archery as most samurai films use narratives of battle and of clan-based honor and loyalty. In other words, it's really about Bushido, about the code of ethics or the code of conduct that governs samurai life and behavior. It's about dedicating oneself to a cause, to bettering oneself through repeated action and through believing wholeheartedly in the transience of the world and the need to place oneself in something much greater than the individual. Now, being made as it was in 1945, when the Pacific conflict, when World War II was just coming to a head, and fire bombings were taking place on an almost daily basis in Tokyo and some other major cities, the significance of this need to celebrate some of the sort of philosophies and ethics and codes of personal conduct associated with the Japanese past, and with devoting oneself to a greater good, have obvious imperatives and obvious import. The strong narrative presence of mothers or mother figures, both the protagonist Daihachiro's own female guardian, played by Tanaka Kinuyo, one of Japan's preeminent actresses, and the mother of the samurai protector, who, though she features little in the narrative, still casts a strong shadow over her son's outlook and his actions, is also suggestive of the contemporary socio-political context in which the film was made. Stories of kamikaze fighters doing it not just for Japan, but dying for their family's name and screaming out devotion to their mother in doing so, are many. And again, this is something that this film is less than subtle in presenting to us, and largely in sort of valorizing. It's a film steeped in traditional Japan. It was shot on location in and around Kyoto, the sort of old cultural capital of Japan, a city rife with tradition and increasingly charged with continuity, given that Tokyo was being all but destroyed. The sense of the lineage of Japan, of its history, was in various ways encoded in Kyoto. And the central location of the Sanjusangendo of the title, a long, very striking hall at which the archery tournaments that we see take place, all very much bespeak this sense of Japanese beauty, of some of the finer aspects of Japan and its culture. As such, this is a film that one could describe very overtly as beautiful to look at. In fact, the 1940s was a time when Naruse was making films that were more aesthetically seductive and pleasing in their mise en scène than many of the films that he is most famous for, that he was making in the 30s and that he would go on to make in the 1950s. Not that these films lack beauty, but their beauty is less obvious, less sort of in your face, as it were. It is striking, for instance, how Naruse cuts between Daihachiro engaged in archery competitions and his mother figure, and her anxiety over him as she thinks about him and, in a sense, looks on from her home. The way that Naruse uses space here, the way that he uses shots that suggest the mother figure figuratively looking on. He cuts between them as though they are sharing physical space, when in fact they are physically separate, is very striking, actually. And also the fact that this is something that Catherine Russell talks nicely about, the fact that he has the mother figure applying makeup and looking in the mirror, in some ways to make herself more attractive, as she feels a sort of strong connection with the strange protector of her surrogate son, but also in the way that she is kind of in some ways questioning herself, the way that she feels in some sense beholden to the needs and the sort of greater good that her surrogate son is striving to work towards and to reclaim. This sense of an anxious sort of female subjectivity is very much Naruse. So the fact that there is an atypical centering of this film on men, on male protagonists, is counterbalanced by this this interest in and elucidation of female subjectivity. The film, as I said, is redolent in some ways of exploring and allegorizing what Japan was fighting for during these last desperate stages of World War II. I mentioned it was shot on location in Kyoto, and indeed on location at the Great Hall, the Sanjusangendo of the title, at which the various archery tournaments take place, which is a very striking piece of architecture. And at a time when Tokyo was being all but destroyed, the sense of, as it were, continuity that Kyoto, the old imperial capital of Japan, offers is something that that this film strikingly depicts. And the sense of a very, not untroubled, but a very obvious beauty that Naruse finds, a sort of quiet beauty that he finds in Kyoto, again speaks to the almost propagandistic nature of this film, although it doesn't feel like obvious sort of naked propaganda. There's also here a very interesting sense of spectatorship. The film opens strikingly with tour guides who are explaining to tourists in Kyoto the prevalence of archery tournaments and the story, or perhaps even the legend, of Daihachiro and his father. And the information is sort of disseminated through the crowd and through different characters whom the camera follows, whom the film follows, as they relay information from group to group or from person to person. And during a later scene, when one of the two key archery tournaments takes place, there is a very striking emphasis on those people, those members of the public who have gathered to watch the tournament taking place, and how they react to and process what's going on in the tournament. And Naruse devotes almost as much narrative time to this as he does to the tournament itself. Indeed, he often elides what you would imagine would be the apex, the sort of point of victory or otherwise of the protagonist. He elides this, and we only learn what happens afterwards when the information is recounted to the mother figure, who is not present at the actual tournament. And here there is a really fascinating sort of narrativization of how people, how actions, how attitudes sort of emanate outwards and move from the here and now, the everyday, into legend, into myth. And given the narrative focus on, although it's not named as such, on Bushido, which had a mythic status and a mythic lineage and importance within the contemporary Japan of 1945. This narrative aspect of the film, I think, is particularly interesting and particularly noteworthy. Overall, then, one would have to chalk this up to minor Naruse, but that certainly does not mean that it is a film without its particular pleasures. So do give it a watch. As always, like, comment and subscribe, or don't, who cares? Follow me on X at AdamBingham01, and I'll see you the next time for another video and another Naruse review.